Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is a cannabis business podcast. Should you take your cannabis company public? Understanding some of the key rules is an important first step in making that decision. There's a number of reasons that a company, whether in the cannabis industry or other industries, might decide to go public. Often they relate to the need for liquidity for expansion and acquisition. Going public presents challenges for companies in the US cannabis industry compared to other industries, given that cannabis is illegal. Nevertheless, in recent years, cannabis companies like Tilray and Canopy Growth, Aurora Cannabis, MedMen, they've all gone public on major stock exchanges, such as the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, Toronto Stock Exchange, and the Canadian Securities Exchange. The liquidity gained by going public has allowed these companies to accelerate expansion during these critical formative years of the legalized global cannabis market. If you are considering taking your cannabis company public, the decision depends on a couple of factors. First, the rules of going public vary considerably from one stock exchange to the next, so you may be limited to which exchange you're available to add your cannabis company to. Under US securities laws, cannabis companies that are in violation of the laws of their home country are prohibited from listing on US stock exchanges, such as the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. And while a US-based company that touches the cannabis plant in the United States is precluded from listing on these exchanges, it's somewhat ironic that a plant-touching cannabis company based in a country where cannabis is legal, such as Canada, is not. Canadian stock exchanges, with the notable exception of the Toronto Stock Exchange, have welcomed cannabis companies, including those that touch the plant. The Toronto Stock Exchange has taken an approach similar to the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ in that it doesn't allow companies that are in violation of federal laws of one of their home countries to list. So a US cannabis company that touches the plant here in the United States cannot list on the Toronto Stock Exchange. On the other hand, a cannabis company that doesn't touch the plant in the US can list on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the Toronto Stock Exchange. Companies that do touch the plant in the US can choose from other exchanges, such as the Canadian Stock Exchange. Furthermore, companies restructuring might allow a separation of various assets that don't touch the plant in the US from assets that do. So in efforts to accelerate timing to list, some companies have locked in shell companies, corporate redomiciling, reverse takeovers. So each investment vehicle has its own rewards and risks and its own efficiencies and complications. So where does this leave a plant-touching cannabis company seeking access to the capital of public markets? While access to capital from cannabis companies is currently more complicated than it is for companies in other industries, with careful planning and preparation, it can be done and done well. With cannabis companies currently enjoying extremely high price to earnings ratios on stock exchanges, the appetite of investor for cannabis stocks appears strong. On the other hand, we're likely to experience a bubble. Much like the first internet bubble, the question of whether or not to go public and where depends in part on where your cannabis company is situated and where it touches the plant. Other factors include the amount of your company's EBITDA, or your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, your projected growth, the state of its books, its short-term, long-term need for capital, the liquidity, the prestige that comes with a publicly traded company, attracting talent as a function of liquidity and prestige, and the cost that required with associated being a publicly traded company. All of these factors are colored in increasing support for the US for ending the prohibition of cannabis. This would in turn open up the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ to companies involved in plant-touching cannabis. So another question to ask is, do you want to wait? And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge, and I'm out.